President of the John Birch Society delivers an address and overview of the world. This event runs about an hour.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Clark. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the John Birch Society. If you'll all rise, we'll open with a meeting with an invocation by Bob Dilley. Following the invitation, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
Thank you, sir. Shall we bow our hearts and our heads? Dear Lord, we thank you for the privilege of meeting as patriotic Americans. We love our country, Lord, and we ask for your blessing upon it. We ask that you will be with each of us this evening, and we ask for a special blessing on our speaker. In Jesus' name, amen. Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for carrying on.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to tell you about the body of men and women that is sponsoring this meeting. The motto of the John Birch Society is less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Frankly, we think that says it all. We want a better world for our children, our children's children, and ourselves. A better world, meaning less government interference in our lives and businesses. What will it take to build this better world? Well, it will certainly take God's help. It will also take more responsibility on the part of us all to preserve and protect our heritage of freedom. And finally, it will mean defeating present and would-be tyrants who wish to enslave us all. Today, friend and foe alike recognize the John Birch Society as the largest, most effective freedom organization in the United States. Our program has awakened and activated more citizens than any other organization. As part of our educational and action agenda to make more Americans aware of the threats that this nation faces, we are sponsoring this meeting. We think you will agree, after hearing our speaker, that the information presented is important enough that you should involve yourself in our epic undertaking. But we also believe responsible action must go hand in hand with education. We hope the meeting will motivate many of you to learn more about the John Birch Society. But when you do, we are sure you will want to become a part of this educational army. We think the John Birch Society is the finest body of actively informed citizens anywhere and worthy of your membership and support. We certainly appreciate your presence at this meeting. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker this evening, Mr. John F. McManus. Was a native of Brooklyn in New York. He's a graduate of Holy Cross College, a former officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He served as an electronics engineer for 6 years. He joined the John Birch Society in 1964, accepted a staff position in 1966, worked alongside the JBS founder Robert Welch for many years. He was named president of the Society in 1991. He is an author of 5 books, a publisher of the New American Magazine, radio and TV spokesman, and a well-traveled speaker. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John F. McManus.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by thanking the local business and professional people for this very professional program that they've put together here. I see a lot of these, but I don't see many of them that are put together better than this one. So I'm very happy about that, and I thank all of the people who contributed to it. It's great to be here. But I've been told the name of this state has changed. It's now Mexifornia. I'm aware that native Californian Victor Davis Hanson has fixed this label to the Golden State in his book about the situation that we find ourselves in. Professor Hansen teaches here in California, and he knows what this state has been enduring because of the immigration invasion. And sad to say, the problems besetting California are being duplicated, though not always as intensely, in just about every state in the Union. Before I get into this very important topic of illegal immigration and what to do about it, I have a couple of stories to tell, each of which makes a very important point. The first is about a fellow who took a friend duck hunting. Now, I've never done this, maybe you have. The friend had never done it either, but he was willing to give it a try. The two were sitting in their little boat on a cold and dreary morning when some ducks flew over, and blam went the shotgun, and a duck came floating down out of the sky. The duck hunter immediately told his duck hunting dog, "Fetch." And the dog walked out on the water, grabbed the duck, and walked back to the boat. Well, the friend was stunned. He was about to remark about this unusual situation when more ducks flew over. Again, blam, another duck came down, and the dog again walked out on the water, grabbed the duck, and walked back. Well, at this point, the duck hunter said to his friend, he said, "Say, have you noticed anything different about my dog?" And the friend said, "Yeah, he can't swim." Obviously, the friend had missed the point. And I contend that most Americans today, especially many elected officials, are missing the point about illegal immigration and a lot of other very important matters. My other story is about a U.S. Navy vessel plowing along in the sea when a light dead ahead flashed and a signal demanded the ship to turn 5 degrees to starboard. Well, when the captain of the Navy vessel saw the message, he told his man to flash back another signal and tell them to turn their 5 degrees to starboard. Well, that prompted a fairly frantic return message. No, 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 you turn your 5 degrees to starboard. Well, the now irate captain of this naval vessel, he told his man to send the following reply. "I'm a captain of the United States Navy aboard this U.S. Navy vessel. You turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard." And that brought back the final response. "I'm a seaman second class, and I'm aboard a lighthouse. You turn your ship 5 degrees to starboard, and do it quickly." The moral of the story is that the credentials you might have after your name or the rank that you might possess aren't as important as the ground you stand on. So we begin this discussion here this evening. We stress that no one should allow himself or herself to be taken away from the real point in any discussion. And further, that any ordinary citizen, if he or she is standing on solid ground with facts and with truth, should not be ignored. I want to talk for a few moments about a document that every American knows or knows about. It's called the Constitution of the United States. You see how big it is here, right? You can imagine if it were made today, it'd be that high off the floor, right? Every politician, of course, swears to abide by it. And every citizen should be familiar with it. But I know that many aren't because it's not being taught very well in the schools of this country. The first thing to know about the Constitution is that it limits government, not the people. Anyone who doesn't understand this has missed the Constitution's main point, like the duck hunter's friend. The document doesn't allow government to do anything except what it specifically prohibits. No, just the other way around. The document says the government may only do what is specifically allowed. And that's a huge difference. I'm not a member of Congress, and I'm not a columnist for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. I'm not a professor at Harvard or some other prestigious university. I'm not the CEO of any gigantic corporation. I'm just the president of the John Birch Society. But I've studied the Constitution, as all good members of the John Birch Society have. And I know what the founders meant when they wrote the venerable document. I also know what the people of 200+ years ago understood about it when they allowed their legislatures to ratify it. And therefore, I stand on some solid ground, just like the seaman who was manning the lighthouse. I think the most important part of the Constitution is right at the beginning, right after the preamble, Article 1, Section 1, Sentence 1, which says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress. That's pretty clear. All lawmaking power resides in Congress, the legislative branch. Even though we're all told that a Supreme Court decision is the law of the land, it can't be if the court is not part of the legislative branch, and it isn't. A Supreme Court decision is what then? A Supreme Court decision is the law of the case. And most of the court's decisions should be, it's none of our business, it's not a federal matter, and hand it back down to the states and to the people themselves. But the justices of the Supreme Court make a federal case out of almost everything, don't they? Also, if all lawmaking power is in Congress, there's no lawmaking power in the executive branch. But recent presidents have issued executive orders that bind the entire nation. This is completely wrong. Former Clinton official Paul Begala once arrogantly stated, "Stroke of the pen, law of the land, kinda cool." And Congress has allowed such a practice for a long time, but it's terribly wrong. A president can properly issue an executive order if it binds only the employees of the government. George Washington issued executive orders. One of them was that all employees of the government shall have a paid holiday on December 25th to celebrate the birth of the Lord. But when an executive order binds the whole nation, even binds the legislative branch, it turns the Constitution on its head, and this is wrong. It's a usurpation of power. In that very first sentence that I quoted, all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress, we find the very important words, herein granted. They mean simply that if power to make a law in some area is not specifically granted within the body of this document, herein granted, in other words, then any such law is illicit. And now I defy anybody to find within the pages of the Constitution any authorization herein granted for laws allowing foreign aid, funding for education, welfare, medicine, housing, transportation, and an array of federal agencies and bureaus that never should have been started. A quick trip through the Constitution shows that only Congress can send a nation into war. That was ignored in Korea, and in Vietnam, and in Desert Storm, and now another war against Iraq. A few weeks before the current war against Iraq, House International Relations Committee Chairman Henry Hyde of Illinois was challenged by a fellow congressman who stressed the constitutional requirement that only Congress can send a nation into war. And Mr. Hyde's response indicts him for all time. He said to his fellow congressman, "That's an anachronism. We don't bother with that anymore." That's right. The sole congressional power to send a nation to war is an anachronism, according to Mr. Henry Hyde. The Constitution gives Congress the power to coin money. All that meant was that Congress could establish a mint to shape the people's gold or silver into coinage of a fixed size and weight and purity, because doing so would help the people to transact business. Everyone wouldn't have to go and weigh the gold or check the purity or look at the size of it. Was it 1 ounce or was it a half ounce or 3/4 or 5/6 or whatever? But the power to coin money does not authorize Congress to give power it never possessed in the first place to a Federal Reserve that now issues totally unbacked paper currency. You can see how far we have departed, how much the Constitution is being ignored. But rest assured, no member of Congress ignores the portion of the Constitution that says that each shall receive compensation for their services. That is not an anachronism. Toward the close of the Constitution, we find a very important requirement in Article 4, Section 4. It says, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. Let me stress that. The United States shall protect each of them, the states, against invasion. Right now, there are upwards of 11 million, and some play as high as 20 million, illegal aliens within our borders. Practically all have entered by crossing the border separating our nation from Mexico. If this isn't an invasion, what is it? The Constitution didn't specify that the states should be protected only against a military invasion. They simply said invasion, and upwards of 11 million illegal entrants constitutes an invasion. When the Constitution places an obligation on the United States, as it does in this portion of the Constitution I've just cited, the President and members of Congress are required to take whatever steps are necessary to meet it. Since every President and every member of Congress has solemnly pledged to honor and abide by the entire Constitution, all Americans should be asking why our elected leaders have not done their job of protecting the states from this obvious invasion. I fear we have arrived at the point where our leaders are busily undertaking programs the Constitution does not allow and failing completely to carry out assignments that they are duty-bound to honor. Almost all politicians, reporters, radio, television commentators, professors, and others customarily refer to these invaders as undocumented workers or guest workers or job-seeking immigrants. Some have referred to them as illegal aliens. But the reality is that these millions who have come here uninvited have thumbed their noses at our laws and are entering our country illegally. They are not like the many immigrants who have come to the United States while respecting our laws. These legal immigrants, and of course, aren't we all maybe part of that, or at least our ancestors? Legal immigrants, many of them Mexicans, have over the years made many substantial contributions to our country. The United States is now their country, the one that they have chosen, and we're glad to have them. But the 11 million here illegally are indeed invaders. And the Constitution of the United States requires that the President and the Congress take action to stop the invasion and expel the invaders. This invasion has produced many serious consequences. Here are some of its results. The invaders have created enormous financial drains on states and communities where they have migrated. The invaders have forced many hospitals out of business because of having to care for immigrants who have no funding. In Southern California alone, over 80 hospitals have closed their doors. A like situation is developing in Arizona. These invaders have inundated the schools with their children and demanded that they receive instruction in their native language rather than in the language of our nation, English. They have filled prisons with their criminal element in highly impacted areas. 30% of federal prison inmates, the perpetrators of violent crimes, are illegal aliens. The invaders have brought with them drugs and other contraband that harms Americans. They have formed criminal gangs and syndicates that terrorize various communities. They have refused to assimilate or even begin steps toward citizenship. They have demanded the return to Mexico of several southwestern states. They have flown the flags of foreign nations while heaping scorn on the Stars and Stripes. They have accepted work at reduced scales with the result that pay scales for poorer Americans have been lowered. Especially impacted by the immigrants who work for reduced wages are the poor blacks among us. But where are the self-appointed leaders of the blacks? This is a real problem that even they should address. And finally, or not finally, but the invaders have also broken our laws against manufacture and use of fraudulent visas, passports, social security identification. They have cast illegal ballots and formed political blocs to support politicians who champion their cause. They have skirted tax laws while insisting on social services paid for by taxpayers. And finally, they have forced the overworked and outmanned U.S. Border Patrol to create a new category of entrants called OTMs, other than Mexicans. The Border Patrol actually has that category and has had it for a good long time, more than 10 years. As we consider the effect of the immigrant invasion, it's well past the time to say, we got a problem. You know, years ago, when one of our spacecraft discovered that some of its re-entry mechanism wasn't working properly, the famous message came, Houston, we have a problem. As we consider the effect of this immigrant invasion, it's well past the time to say, Washington, we have a problem. So let's discuss the wrong responses to the invasion. All of what I have just described is indeed happening, and the response offered by President Bush and some members of Congress is just the opposite of what it should be. A major proposal suggested by our leaders who don't get the point calls for granting amnesty to the invaders. Some of the legislators make this proposal using cleverly concocted terms such as guest workers, regional regularization, legalization, or whatever. But what they are really suggesting is amnesty. And amnesty is the rewarding of people who have broken our laws. I have here a copy of the New American Magazine. This is our publication, and you can see President George Bush on the cover, and the headline says, Camouflaging Amnesty. The subtitle here says, his guest worker program would endanger America. Yes, indeed, it certainly would. History shows that amnesty for illegal entrants only encourages more to illegally cross the border. An extensive survey taken in Mexico by the liberal Pew Hispanic Center showed that 46% of Mexico City's citizens would like to move to the United States. That's 50 million persons. Are we willing to accept more Mexicans into the United States, even if most of them are merely seeking a better life? The answer is yes, but only for those who apply for entry under the laws that are designed to welcome qualified applicants. In 1986, Congress passed a piece of legislation. The President signed it. It was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act. It granted amnesty to 2.7 million invaders who were already here. That's 20 years ago. The politicians who crafted the bill assured opponents that their bill had solved the immigration problem. They assured fellow legislators and the American people that there wouldn't be any more persons crossing the border. But just the opposite happened, as even more foreigners started flooding across the southern border. Now, amnesty proposals, if passed, will reward upwards of 11 million lawbreakers with the most coveted status in the world, and that is free access to America and the full road to American citizenship. This would reduce to mockery the road traveled by so many who complied with our laws and entered our nation legally and stood in various lines and studied to pass citizenship tests, learned the English language, pledged to obey our nation's laws, and gratefully assimilated into the American system. Congressman James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin stated during recent debate about proposed changes in our immigration laws, he said, "I do not support amnesty for illegal aliens. That rewards law-breaking. The way the Senate bill works," he said, "the longer somebody has broken the law, the better the benefit they get." And he said that makes a bad situation worse. He's absolutely correct. And as much as 2 years ago, Colorado Congressman Tom Tancredo challenged President Bush's intention to create a guest worker program, a fancy name for what is essentially amnesty. Mr. Tancredo noted that no sooner had the president's proposal been aired that quote, I should say, the number of illegal aliens being apprehended on the southwestern border jumped 25%, end quote. He added, "I can think of few things that could be more dangerous for Homeland Security than granting amnesty to 8 to 12 million illegal entrants." Right on. Mr. Sensenbrenner, Mr. Tancredo, Mr. J.D. Hayworth of Arizona, and others are leading in the Congress to do what is needed to address the invasion. These men do not have the stature or the public persona of the President and some of the leaders of the House and Senate, but the ground they stand on is constitutionally sound. Wouldn't you think that a President of the United States would know that rewarding lawbreaking has always led to more lawbreaking? Sensible individuals don't treat an outbreak of burglary by abolishing the laws against burglary. Yet this is essentially what many political leaders and our nation's high and mighty intelligentsia are recommending. The ground they stand on is very, very shaky indeed. The ground we stand on is firm, like that ground under the lighthouse. So let's discuss what should be done. The point we wish to stress is that action is needed. Let's not decide merely that the duck hunting dog can't swim. Let's point to the obvious fact that he walked on the water. And the obvious conclusion in this instance is that the following steps ought to be undertaken by our leaders if this nation is going to remain free and independent. So I offer an even dozen recommendations, each of which deserves support by our elected officials. And I dare say, each of which has the support of a large majority of the American people. My first recommendation is reject all calls for amnesty under any name. Number two, protect the southwestern border with a substantial fence. Number three, beef up the Border Patrol, and if needed, station American military personnel at the border. Shouldn't military force be used to repel an invasion? Why should the New York City Police Department be 2.5 times the size of the Border Patrol? The size of New York City is next to nothing compared with a 2,000-mile border with Mexico and an even larger border with Canada. What else do we recommend? Keep promises. When President Bush entered the White House, he promised to hire 2,000 more Border Patrol agents every year. He didn't. If he had kept his promise, there would be 10,000 new Border Patrol agents by now, but he has arranged for fewer new agents than are lost through normal attrition. Next recommendation, increase penalties for anyone involved in document fraud, visas, passports, Social Security identification. Then, withhold federal funds from state and local governments that impede their own law enforcement personnel from questioning, apprehending, or detaining invaders. That is going on. Number 7, cancel the granting of automatic citizenship to infants born here of illegal immigrants. These so-called anchor babies are then given the right to invite family members to enter our nation. This is ridiculous. Enforce existing laws against hiring illegal immigrants. Number 9, begin the process of deporting those who have invaded our nation. Each person deported should be advised that there is a proper process to enter this nation. In most cases, he or she should be invited to enter legally. Number 10, urge the appropriate U.S. authorities to investigate the activities of some enormously wealthy tax-exempt foundations, such as the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Endowment, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, AT&T, and a lot of others. These fountainheads of money supply funds for militant hate America groups such as MALDEF, M-A-L-D-E-F, Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, La Raza, the race, MICA, Chicano student movement of Aztlan, and others. I've just mentioned a few. Aztlan is the Aztec word for the homeland of the Aztecs. Isn't it strange that arguments against illegal immigration are deemed racist, when the meaning in English of one of the largest groups promoting illegal immigration, La Raza, means the race? It is they who are the racists. Number 11, inform elected officials and candidates for office at every level that their stance regarding all of the above recommendations will be considered by voters on Election Day. Number 12, notify Mexico's authorities, right up to and including President Fox, that our nation will no longer tolerate any meddling in our legal affairs or trespassing into our nation by Mexican police and military units. There have been more than 200 incursions by military units from Mexico into the United States, many for the purpose of providing cover for drug smugglers. A Mexican consul named Jose Pescador Osuna, who is residing in the United States, has boldly stated, "We are practicing la reconquista in California." A few years ago, the Mexican government under Vicente Fox published a pamphlet instructing Mexicans how to skirt U.S. laws and cross the border into our country. These people and the many Hispanic radicals in California's local governments and colleges who are working with Mexican authorities and stimulating anti-Americanism, they have to be told that their subversive rhetoric and action must cease. Notice should be given that this nation will consider any action by the Mexican government to spur illegal entry into the U.S. a hostile act that will be met with serious consequences. Now, there's a dozen recommendations, but I'm going to make it a baker's dozen. I'm going to add a 13th. And my 13th recommendation is that Mexican leaders abandon the socialism in their country and all of its deadly drag on productivity so that the Mexican people can do for themselves what the people in this nation have been able to do under a limited government, earn a decent living and not have to flee to some other country. This is what needs to be done. All of you who are in this audience and many more who are viewing this program through the magic of cable television must force our leaders to take the steps needed to put an end to the invasion, to protect this nation, and to treat invaders the way any sensible leader should treat an invasion. All Americans must realize that there can be no more wishful thinking, no more leaving it up to George or Pete or Sally or even to the John Birch Society. We need to grow in this John Birch Society. And you shouldn't leave it up. No more toleration of halfway measures that end up making problems we have identified even worse. Action and not talk is needed. Everyone knows that our nation is a nation of immigrants. Except for the American Indians, either we ourselves or our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so forth came here from elsewhere. How many know that the city with the second largest number of ethnic Poles, second only to Warsaw in Poland, is Chicago, Illinois? They came here legally, as did Boston's Irish, Michigan's Dutch, Milwaukee's Germans, and so forth. None of these people wanted anything more than to be free to work, to produce, to keep the fruits of their labor, and to pass on to children and grandchildren the wonderful system of government that made our country the envy of the world and attracted them here in the first place. Our ancestors came here legally, quickly learned the language, if they didn't already know it, adopted the American culture, attained full citizenship. Our nation still welcomes close to 1 million legal immigrants every year. But the invaders who have come here illegally are demanding the rights and privileges of citizenship while threatening to destroy the nation if their demands are not met. Invaders are different and should be treated differently. No nation can long exist with a large and determined minority deliberately dividing it and working to destroy it. Did I say destroy? Yes, I did. because the Mexican-American organizations I mentioned previously are working to fragment and eventually destroy the independence, even the very existence of our nation. Their boldly stated intentions and actions are being ignored by our own leaders and are being financed by the tax-exempt groups mentioned previously. We are expected to stand by and watch as the invaders take control of our nation piece by piece. Has America gone crazy? Have we reached such a level of comfort that we're too busy enjoying life to be concerned about the future for ourselves and our children? Shouldn't we use the influence each of us has to force our leaders to do their job, to obey the Constitution they have sworn to uphold, and to do their duty to protect the nation from invasion? 16 centuries ago, beginning around 370 AD, the Roman Emperor Valens opened the gates of the Roman Empire for Germanic tribes known as Ostrogoths and Visigoths. He did so mainly because he wanted troops for his army and a source of cheap labor. Eventually, these immigrants rebelled and went to war in the provinces against the Roman legions. By the end of a decade, the Roman army was decimated by the Goths, and soon after, Rome itself fell to the immigrants, and the Roman Empire was declared finished. Can we learn from what happened to the Romans? They allowed an alien invasion into their provinces. They permitted ambitious leaders of the Goths to radicalize the Gothic immigrants. They believed that whatever the radicals were saying couldn't happen here, but it did. Even the Emperor Valens died in a famous battle against the upstart Goths. Like the Emperor Valens, President George Bush and other US leaders, especially some corporate leaders, see the people of Mexico as a source of cheap labor, or even as a source of recruits for our thinly spread military. These leaders bleat about compassion, as if compassion is a substitute for sound thinking and the enforcement of our laws. They either know no history or they have an agenda leading to world government that must be exposed. Let me mention an existing internationalist agenda that is preparing mankind for world government. Consider, in March 2005, President Bush hosted a meeting near his home in Waco, Texas. It was attended by the presidents of Mexico and Canada, President Fox and Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Martin. The three met to launch what they called the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. Now, doesn't that sound nice? Security, prosperity, partnership. Hasn't it always been a tactic for some to put nice-sounding words on sinister proposals? The Security and Prosperity Partnership, however, is a scheme to abolish the borders of the three nations and create a regional government similar to the European Union. We can take care of the border problem by doing away with the border, they say. The Security and Prosperity Partnership will lead to an eventual transfer of this new regional government called the North America into a world government. The impetus for this revolutionary program came from the Council on Foreign Relations, the elite group of one-worlders whose long history of working to subvert our nation's independence can easily be documented. In fact, it has been documented, and I can't possibly recommend a book more highly than The Shadows of Power by James Perloff. You'll find some on the book table at the back. The history of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations now has close to 500 of its members in the US government, including Vice President Cheney, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and a whole bunch of others in high positions. And this indicates why this Security and Prosperity Partnership is being considered. Let's go over a little bit of history of this subversive proposal. In June 2005, a Council on Foreign Relations task force issued a document entitled Building a North American Community. It calls for the common border around the US, Canada, and Mexico. It seeks integration of Mexican and Canadian personnel into our nation's Department of Homeland Security. And it calls for immigrant worker programs to be expanded so that any worker from each of these three countries can relocate to wherever he chooses. From this Building a North American Community document has come the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Only a few weeks ago, in March of 2006, this radical program received additional backing from Mr. Bush and his Mexican and Canadian counterparts. The three men met in Cancun, Mexico, and they held a press conference in front of a banner containing the words Security and Prosperity Partnership. I assure you, I'm not making this up. Is President Bush acting on his constitutionally authorized responsibility to protect the nation against invasion? Absolutely not. It's clear. Some time ago, he signed a Social Security totalization agreement with Mexico that is a financial time bomb for our country. He began the acceptance of the fraudulent matricula consular cards, ID cards, that make it easy for illegal invaders to obtain driver's licenses, bank accounts, Social Security cards, voter registration, and taxpayer-financed home loans. He has spurred additional border crossings with his pledge to grant what is essentially amnesty. The Mexicans know what his guest worker program means. Why don't Americans know? And why don't they object? Mr. Bush has blocked publication of investigatory reports pointing to the bribery and corruption within the very federal agency charged with deciding the legitimacy of claims from immigrants who are seeking citizenship and legal residency. And Mr. Bush is not alone, as many senators and congressmen, the Kennedys, the McCains, the Specters, and others are equally deficient in addressing this invasion. Most Americans have heard of the Free Trade Area of the Americas, FTAA. I sometimes think it means forced transfer of America's assets, but that's something else. Conceived during the Clinton administration and heavily backed by President Bush, it calls for building a NAFTA-style free trade area for 34 nations of the Western Hemisphere. Every nation in the Western Hemisphere except Cuba. These free trade agreements, however, are about far more than free trade. They are regional governments designed to be eased into a United Nations-led world government. Mr. Bush began promoting acceptance of this FTAA immediately upon taking office in 2001. He claimed that he would send the measure creating it to Congress for passage in January of 2005. But the John Birch Society went to work, and for quite a few months before his target date, and our members exposed this subversive plan. As a result, the measure was never given to Congress for its approval because the president and his team knew it would be rejected. So the FTAA promoters decided to implement its various provisions piecemeal. And that is what this Security and Prosperity Partnership is all about. A step toward the FTAA, and the goal, obvious to anyone who studies the matter, is to deliver our nation to a world government led by the likes of people who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. If the plans of these world government advocates are implemented, we can kiss the U.S. Constitution goodbye. We can tear up the Declaration of Independence, and we can stand by and watch America converted into a carbon copy of thousands of despotisms that have come before. We have already suggested many steps that must be taken to protect our nation. The first step is to regain control of our borders. Once that is done by a reawakened Congress, which must be reawakened by you who are before me and others who are hearing this message on television, then other steps will follow. Only a few days ago, Cuban dictator Fidel Castro called for the United States to give several states back to Mexico, California included, and portions of others that are called Aztlan by anti-American radicals. Castro referred to this huge area as Mexican territory, and he stated that Mexicans are only crossing the border into what is their territory. Thank you, Fidel Castro. His support for the illegal invaders of our nation should help many more Americans to understand what is really going on here. You know, we don't have to accept the invasion of our country by people from other nations. We don't have to lose our country to the internationalists who want to rule the world. We can force our leaders to do what's right for America. And we can even restore the Constitution to full force and effect, but only if we have the understanding and the determination to do so. Where do you get the understanding? I suggest the John Birch Society. And so I close this analysis I began. Let no one miss the point, like the man who went duck hunting. Let no one feel inadequate because of being just an ordinary citizen, somewhat like the sailor in the lighthouse. And let's all realize that it is the responsibility of our leaders, their sworn responsibility taken under oath, to protect this nation against invasion. It is not just the Southwest. Our entire nation is threatened. We cannot allow our nation to be abolished. For those who would like to steer America back on course, contact the John Birch Society. Telephone number 1-800-JBS-USA-1. The internet, jbs.org. The mail address, Post Office Box 8040, Appleton, Wisconsin 54912. We're glad to hear from anybody. And so I close with an urging that we take our country back. And I say, God bless you all. Thanks for listening. And God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John McManus, for that impressive speech. And John has been gracious enough to stick around and answer questions from the audience. So what I'm going to do is I'll be your roving microphone, and I will meet you where if you have questions, just raise your hand. Please wait till I get there to you and put the microphone in front of your face so that we can all hear what you have to ask. So, questions?
How do we establish credibility?
Wait till he gets to you.
How do we establish credibility?
How do we meaning the John Birch Society?
Or anybody else who feels the way that the John Birch Society
Well, one of the
feels?
ways is to get C-SPAN to broadcast our speech to the nation, and we're very grateful for that. Another thing is for every member to not be bashful, not to be hold back. You never know when you're going to find somebody that is quite willing to take a good hard look and get involved, and you'll be surprised. The people you might expect would want to help sometimes don't, and the people that you don't expect sometimes do. I certainly remember that happening during the crazy Vietnam days. We found an awful lot of young people who were very anxiously working against the war in Vietnam and thought that they were extreme leftists. And we went to them and we explained a little bit about what was happening. They asked to see some more information, and some of them became very, very good members of the John Birch Society. You just never know. But what you don't do is you don't sit back and stew about it. You get out there and you do what you can. Explode in your neighborhood. Explode where you work. Explode everywhere. But of course, do it with gentility and so on.
Hi. I was wondering, how would we, as American citizens, use our influence to let corporate America know that we don't agree with their support of MALDEF, La Raza, and cheap labor?
Well, I think one thing you can do is write to some of these corporate America people and say, I understand that you've been helping those who want to destroy our country, and I think it's time that I let you know that until you stop, I'm not buying your product anymore. That would certainly begin it. But I also mentioned, as you may recall during the speech, that I think it's time for some government officials to start investigating some of these tax-exempt foundations. The Ford Foundation is actually probably the worst offender in this regard. They have actually built MALDEF and La Raza and so forth, and some of the others have then chipped in. But I did mention the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, AT&T Foundation, and so forth. There's plenty of them. There are even some government agencies that are helping some of these revolutionary immigrant-promoting organizations. Yes?
If the Council on Foreign Relations wants to expand or unite Canada, the United States, and Mexico, how come I don't hear anything from them complaining about what's going on in the Panama Canal? That China controls both ends, and if they do intend to bring this so-called nation, expand it down towards Panama, why are they allowing Panama to be under the most dangerous nation on earth in a defense structure with us?
All right, well, you've got a long question there. The answer to it is the Council on Foreign Relations has an agenda. And its agenda from when it began in 1921 is to build a world government. And that means destroy the independence of our nation and all nations. And so all of the things that I've talked about and plenty more, and of course, again, I can't recommend more highly this book by James Perloff, who did an awful lot of study into the whole history of this Council on Foreign Relations. And it will simply show. I don't think anybody can be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and swear an oath to the U.S. Constitution at the same time. I think it's an impossibility. And yet, as I mentioned, there are close to 500 members of the U.S. government who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. But let me also mention that the heads of ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, and Time and Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report, and National Review, and a lot of other magazines, and the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, and the LA Times, you find Council on Foreign Relations writers and executives and so forth in all of these publications. And that probably answers your question even more. Why don't people know about what's happening in Panama? Why don't people know what's happening in Central America and so forth? They rely on the normal sources of information, and they've been co-opted. So what is the John Birch Society? It's a new medium of information to combat the existing media, which is a plural word. We are ourselves a competitor. And all we ask is for people to take a look at what we have to say. And I would dare say that many of the people in this room, when they first came in contact with something from the John Birch Society, they shook your head and no, this can't be true. Or when somebody first approached you, said, no, I don't want to do anything with that, it's subversive, or it's crazy, or it's kooky, or it's whatever. And yet, here you are. Here I am. I started off my relationship with the John Birch Society by attacking the founder of the society in a letter to the editor of a national magazine. And because I did, somebody found out where I was and wrote me a letter. Are you basing your attitude upon what the John Birch Society has said or what others have said of it? Wow, what a good question. I surprised the heck out of the guy. I wrote back to him. Send me something, I'll take a look at it. I intended to show him how wrong he was. Didn't happen. Right. Another question.
Hi, my name is John. I live here in San Jose. I'm very worried about the massive trade deficit that we have in comparison with other countries. And I think if I recall correctly, our trade deficit last year, last year was almost $800 billion. And what steps?
It's on a pace right now to exceed what it was last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, what steps do you recommend, or like for an average Joe like me here in San Jose should take to at least influence or make an impact?
Well,
minimize it?
generally the answer is we take our country back through the House of Representatives. For all of my lifetime, the presidency has been in the hands of people from the Council on Foreign Relations or closely associated with them. All right? The Constitution of the United States has a very important little article in it. It says all bills for raising revenue must originate in the House of Representatives. All right? So if the House of Representatives does not originate a bill that impacts the trade deficit or education or this or that or something else, then there's nothing the Senate, the President, the Supreme Court, or the New York Times can do about it. That power in the House of Representatives is very, very important. And one of the first things you can do is get a hold of your congressman and ask him if he realizes that portion of the Constitution, because some of them don't. Right? And when you do, then you will earn his respect, and then he might start to listen to you about other things. If he will not, then you got to work to get somebody else. And we're not a political organization in the John Birch Society. We don't back candidates and nominate candidates and fund candidates. We don't have to do that with all of the people who are in the Birch Society. They know who's good. They know who's not good. They know what to do, and so forth. But we'll say it again. We'll take our country back through the House of Representatives, and that's where we got to go. Another question.
I heard on the radio last night that the Georgia legislature has passed legislation making it illegal to, or effectively eliminating the tax deduction for the wages of illegal immigrants. Can you comment on that?
Well, a lot of these things that the states are doing are good. I know that there have been some good measures passed in some of the Rocky Mountain states and some others being considered here and there and everything else. The problem is that the power of the states has been usurped by the federal government and the Supreme Court. And a lot of these things that these states are trying to do, which are good, are probably going to be wiped away by Supreme Court decisions or by federal whatever. And the states seem powerless. They are not powerless, but they act as though they are powerless, and that's got to stop too. The thing to remember about that is that the federal government came second. The states existed first. Another question here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell us how dual citizenship works into the phenomena of open borders with Mexico.
Well, dual citizenship is something that it's really not that much of a problem. I don't know that there are that many who are dual Mexican and American citizenship. I really haven't investigated that because I just don't think it's that big a problem. The question here?
I was just thinking about this scenario, and tell me if this is correct. If all these illegals come in, do not assimilate, and there are a lot of American haters among that group, could they not eventually vote to open all the borders? And
Absolutely.
we would lose our country.
Absolutely. There are many of them that are already voting, and they shouldn't be voting. They're not citizens. And this is being allowed, and it's being encouraged by leftist politicians amongst us who want their votes and want their support. And, you know, it's a case of, I don't care if you destroy the country because I'm going to be here when the new thing is built on the ashes and so forth. That's a horrible attitude, but I believe that there are some who hold that attitude. And then, of course, there are the lace curtain Irish, like the Kennedys and the Kerrys and others. You know, sometimes people say to me, how can you live in Massachusetts? And my answer is, I like to work behind enemy lines.
It seems to a lot of us that, and I think it's true, that both Republican and Democrat parties, we're talking about politics and political parties. It's absolutely today so clear that there is very much cooperation, corroboration, no real competition.
No competition between the Demoblicans and the Republicrats?
Exactly, exactly. And this is
Now,
a process.
let me stop there and say that at the top I agree, at the very top. But when you get down into some of the senatorial situations and some of the Congress, many of the Congress situations, then there is a difference. And then you have a choice. And I'm not going to tell you who to choose. You already know. But it is such. Now, you go back to 1952, and I put together a list recently of all the presidents from the presidential candidates from the Democrats and Republicans. Starting in 1952, Eisenhower versus Stevenson, both members of the Council on Foreign Relations, and you go all the way down up until today, and there's only a handful who weren't already members, and the ones who weren't members were surrounded by people who were. And then, so they were influenced. The Council on Foreign Relations is a very potent organization. And you know, all the effort that we have done over the years to try to expose them has flushed them out to some degree. And you'll now see op-ed pieces in the newspaper where they sign it at the bottom, a member of the staff of the Council on Foreign Relations. And they go before the press, they meet the press or the Face the Nations or something like that. And they admit, oh yes, I'm a staff member of the Council on Foreign Relations. But the president of the Council on Foreign Relations is a man named Haas. H-A-A-S-S, 2 S's. And he recently said it's time to rethink national sovereignty. Right? What else do you need to know? All right?
A theoretical question. What's the possibility of getting back to the legislatures appointing our senators?
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful, huh? Right? How many Americans are totally unaware of that? That the Constitution called for the House of Representatives to be voted by the people and the U.S. Senate to be appointed by the states' legislatures for the purpose of being the influence within the federal government on the side of the states versus the federal government. And that was changed in 1913 with an amendment, and it was a mistake, a bad mistake. A lot of people thought it was right. They thought that, you know, everybody should have a vote about everything, and no, that's not so. That's not what the Founding Fathers wanted, and it's brilliant. 1913 was quite a year. Income tax, Federal Reserve, direct election of senators. Wow, quite a year. Thank you, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Edward Mandell House, the founder of the Council on Foreign Relations. Right, right. So, are we done? Here's a question here.
I'd like to know your opinion on George Bush's Supreme Court nominees.
Well, so far, the 2 Supreme Court nominees, we have no track record on either one of them. They certainly do seem to be people that might uphold the Constitution the way it was supposed to be. That would be Judge Roberts and then the new man, Alito, Samuel Alito. I don't know. It's too early to say. But based on the fact that they were able to get approved and seemingly have no real revolutionary past as some of the other appointees did, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Judge Breyer from Boston. And so, you know, you've even got Supreme Court justices now going to foreign nations and saying that we intend to adopt your procedures into our government while they're swearing an oath to the Constitution. You know, what a world we're living in. A lot of things are upside down. So we got a lot of work to do. I think maybe it's time to close.
I think, unless there are any other questions.
Oh, we still have.
Hand popped.
All right, go ahead, a couple more.
Yes, Mr. McManus, have you wondered if the 30 to 40 million aborted babies in this country might have created a vacuum where there's unmanned jobs that created a vacuum for people to come in here to man them?
How could you say otherwise, right? Yeah, it has created a diminution of the labor pool. It's created a lot of other problems. It's a terrible blot on this country. I'm proud to say that the John Birch Society came out with a document 3 years before Roe versus Wade calling abortion murder, and it never should ever be allowed in the United States of America or anywhere. And 3 years before, we knew it was coming. We could see, we could sense, so, as we can see other things that are coming. In fact, you look into the track record of the John Birch Society, And there are many people who say, well, how did you know that this was going to happen a year ago? I said, well, we do our homework. You know, we see the signs. We project the lines, is what Robert Welsh always used to say. Project the lines, and you'll see where these people are taking us and where we are going. So, yes.
John, I've heard you before. Can you tell us about some books you've written?
Some books that I've written?
Yes. Have you written some
Well,
books?
I wrote a little book about the Council on Foreign Relations called The Insiders. I don't have a copy here. It just goes over the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and others dominating the last 5 administrations, including the current one. That's one book I wrote. I wrote a book called Financial Terrorism to try to get people to understand what money really is, what the Constitution of the United States says regarding money, and so forth. I wrote a book called Changing Commands, The Betrayal of America's Military. As you may have heard when I was introduced, I did serve as a Marine Corps officer for 3 years. Very good part of my life, very, very valuable. And I wrote a book called William F. Buckley, Jr., Pied Piper for the Establishment, to show the background of one of the most important enemies of free America that has ever come down the pike. William Buckley has done more to keep decent, honorable people from being involved in something that could really help to save their country than any other man alive. And the history that I came up with, I know people who didn't like William Buckley, they read my book and they just said, I didn't know it was that bad. Right. Last question here. Yes, sir.
Just a statement, and a member of the CFR.
You are a member of this?
Buckley.
Oh, Buckley. Yes. In fact, it was amazing to me that in a article where he was interviewed, he acknowledged the existence of my book. He said it was boring. And then he said all he ever said about me was that I joined the Council on Foreign Relations. Well, that's not all we said about you, Mr. Buckley. We said plenty more. So that's a book you might want to take a look at. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you, John McManus.